The Horror Box. The Night Shift caller, welcome back to Halfway Dark, the home of the Horror Box, where the darkest Reddit horror stories and night shift tailies come alive. Tonight's story will keep you awake long after the lights go out, about a night shift that never ends and a caller you can't ignore. Before we begin, hit subscribe. Once the line starts ringing, the Horror Box knows you're listening, and it may decide to join you in the dark. Every whisper, every shadow, every pause is part of the story, and it's watching. I took the night shift at the 24-hour convenience store because I needed money and peace. I thought it would be quiet. I thought wrong. The first week passed uneventfully. Regulars, a tired trucker, a drunk man at 2 a.m, someone picking up milk at 3:17. But then the calls started. It was always the same. My store's phone ringing in the dead hours. I answered once, half asleep, a line of static. Then my voice, my exact voice. "I shouldn't be here," it said. I slammed the receiver down. My heartbeat rattled my ribs. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe I was losing sleep. The next night, the phone rang again. I didn't answer. But the receiver lifted itself slightly, like someone unseen had picked it up. And the voice came anyway. "You're here again. Don't leave." I ran to the break room, but the doors were locked, not from the outside, from inside. The lights flickered. The fluorescent hum warped, slowing then speeding up. My reflection in the glass door seemed delayed, moving half a second after I did. My own hands reached for the intercom, and the voice stopped, replaced by a soft chuckle. I told myself it was exhaustion, but the pattern was clear. Every night, at 1:03 a.m, the phone rang. And every night, my voice begged me not to leave. I tried recording it. The footage played back as normal. No static, no strange phenomena. Only my own mundane night shift. I asked coworkers if anyone else had experienced it. They looked at me blankly. "Nope, only you work the night shift," they said. The truckers, the late-night wanderers, none reported anything unusual. And then the caller started giving instructions. Not commands, exactly. Suggestions. Look under the counter. Check the security cameras. Don't leave until the clock strikes 3. I followed them. Each instruction seemed mundane, but each resulted in a shift in the store. A rack slightly moved. A shelf tilted. An aisle longer than it had been when I arrived. By the 3rd week, I realized the calls were tracking me. My voice wasn't the only one speaking through the line. Sometimes the voice of a stranger joined mine, faint, distorted, whispering secrets about me that I hadn't told anyone. It knew my fears, my routines, my weaknesses, and it knew when I doubted myself. One night, I stayed past 4 a.m. The store was empty, silent, except for the ringing phone. I ignored it. I left the receiver on the hook. The voice came anyway. "Do you see it?" I turned slowly. The aisle seemed to stretch infinitely. The products warped. Milk cartons floated slightly above the shelves. Snacks quivered. And there, in the reflection of the cooler doors, me. Only wrong. Too still. My eyes black. My mouth moving silently. The voice continued, "Don't leave." "Not yet. We're waiting." I backed toward the door. The lights went out. My own shadow rose from the floor, independent of my movement, pointing at the back aisle. I ran, but the layout had changed. Every aisle led me in circles. The exit, the front door, the parking lot, gone. The store was infinite. Every checkout lane stretched into darkness, and the phone ringing in the void. My voice calling me from every corner. I tried to scream, but the sound came out wrong. A whisper of myself, repeated infinitely. The shelves quivered. Products fell in slow motion, creating walls and corridors I couldn't escape. I stopped, terrified, trying to understand the rules. It wasn't just a caller. It was a test. Every movement, every thought, every panic, recorded and replayed back at me. I realized it wanted obedience. Follow the instructions, and I could survive. Break them, and the store became an endless trap. I followed the next set of instructions carefully. Walk to the back, look at the freezer doors. Don't blink. Don't breathe too heavily. Open one, slowly. I did. Inside was a corridor. Not a freezer, not a room, but a hall stretching endlessly into darkness. And along the walls, faces. Familiar faces. Friends, family, neighbors, strangers, all staring silently, waiting. I had no choice. I walked through. Every step echoed as if the floor remembered my movements from years ago. The whispers followed me, my voice guiding me forward. The hallway ended in a mirrored wall. I could see everything. The aisles, the shelves, the front counter, the store as it should have been, but warped, bleeding into infinity. And in the mirror, my reflection waved at me. Or rather, my other self, the version that never left the line ringing. You've come this far. Stay. I stepped back. The floor shifted. The lights flickered violently. I woke up the next morning in the break room. Everything was normal, except the phone was off the hook, quietly ringing. And I knew, deep inside, that tonight, and every night after, it would call again. It always calls, and it waits for you too. That was the horror box, the night shift caller, here on Halfway Dark. If you work late, if you're alone, if the phone in your home rings, subscribe. The horror box may already know your number. Every listener becomes part of the story. Every shadow a reflection of the caller waiting in the dark. Step inside. Answer the call if you dare. True Reddit horror stories from night shift workers. There's a unique kind of quiet that settles over the world after midnight. It's thick, it's heavy, and for most people, it's a comfort. They're safe in their beds, while a handful of others are just starting their workday. They are the watchers in the dark, the keepers of empty spaces. And in that profound loneliness, the line between the normal and the horrifying can get terrifyingly thin. Tonight, we're digging into the chilling experiences of those who work while the rest of us sleep. These stories come from the deep corners of Reddit, shared by people who've stared into the darkness and seen something stare right back. If you enjoy these stories, think about subscribing for more tailies from the fringe. Our first story comes from a user who worked the graveyard shift for a year at a remote, 24-hour gas station. You know, the kind less a part of civilization and more a lonely island of light in an ocean of dark country roads. Most nights were just a slow crawl of stocking shelves, cleaning coffee pots, and watching the hours tick by. The only company was the hum of the freezers and the occasional trucker stopping for fuel. The nights it rained were the worst. The world outside the plate glass windows would dissolve into a blurry, distorted mess, and the drumming on the roof felt like it was counting down to something awful. It was on one of these nights that his comfortable boredom curdled into raw fear. Around 2 a.m, a car pulled up to pump 4, the one furthest from the store. That was strange. Late-night customers almost always chose the well-lit pumps closer to the door. He watched as a man got out. Through the sheets of rain, he couldn't make out any features, just a tall, thin silhouette that moved with a weird, jerky stiffness. The man didn't grab the pump. He just stood there, facing the store, perfectly still. Minutes stretched into 10, then 20. The rain hammered down, but the figure at pump 4 was motionless, a dark statue in the middle of the storm. A prickle of unease crawled up the employee's spine. He thought about calling the police, but what would he even say? That a man was just standing there. He decided to try the external intercom. "Sir, can I help you with anything out there?" he asked, his voice sounding small and tinny through the speaker. No response. The figure didn't twitch a muscle. It just stood there, facing him. He was about to hit the button again when he saw something else. Behind the man, near the edge of the woods bordering the property, a pair of headlights cut through the darkness and immediately shut off. A second car had arrived, silently, without even pulling into the lot. A cold dread washed over him. This wasn't a customer. This was something else. He quickly locked the front door and ran to the small back office, his heart pounding. He flicked through the security monitors. Camera 1, front of the store, empty. Camera 2, the side lot, empty. Camera 3, covering pumps 3 and 4, showed nothing. Just the rain-slicked asphalt where the man should have been. He rewound the footage. He watched himself on the monitor, looking out the window. He saw the car pull up, but when he zoomed in on the driver, the image was just a mess of digital noise. It was a person-shaped block of static. He fast-forwarded to the moment he ran to the back room. The instant he was off-screen, the static figure at the pump just vanished. It didn't walk away. It didn't get back in its car. It was there one frame and gone the next. The car it came in was gone too. He just sat there, staring at the screen, the hum of the servers seeming to get louder in the silence. He never saw the figure again, but for the rest of his time on that shift, he never really felt alone. He'd find himself glancing at pump 4, half expecting to see that static silhouette standing in the rain, a silent sentinel from some place he couldn't understand, and a chilling reminder of how fast the ordinary can become a nightmare. From the fear of being watched in an empty lot, our next story takes us to a place where the watchers are supposed to be long gone. It comes from a man named Mark, who took a job most people wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole, the only night watchman at an abandoned hospital. St. Jude's Mercy Hospital had been closed for nearly a decade. It was a massive, sprawling brick building from the 50s, slated for demolition, but tied up in a legal fight that felt like it would never end. My job, as the security guard, was simple. Walk the perimeter, do a full inside patrol twice a night, and make sure no vandals or squatters got in. For the first few weeks, it was the easiest money I'd ever made. The silence was absolute, a kind of peace you can't find anywhere else. I had a little office near the old A entrance with a cot, a coffee maker, and a stack of books. The hospital was my own private, concrete kingdom. The first time I heard the footsteps, I was on my 1 in the morning, round on the 3rd floor, the old maternity ward. It was a faint sound from the floor above me. Thump, thump, thump. Slow, heavy, deliberate. I shrugged it off. Old buildings make noises. Plumbing, heating, settling. I finished my patrol and forgot about it. A week later, I heard it again. This time, I was on the 2nd floor, past the old surgical suites. The footsteps were on the 3rd floor, right above me. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded like someone in heavy boots was matching me, step for step. I stopped. The footsteps above me stopped. I took a step. A moment later, a thump echoed from the ceiling. A chill went down my spine. I called out, my voice way too loud in the dead air. Hello? Anybody up there? Just silence. I did a full sweep of the 3rd and 4th floors. Nothing. Every door was locked from the outside. All the windows bolted. Nobody was there. The logical part of my brain was fighting a war with the primal fear bubbling up in my gut. I mean, this was a hospital where thousands of people had died. It had to have a few ghosts, right? I started to think of the footsteps as my partner, the resident spirit of St. Jude's. It was a coping mechanism, a way to file the terror under paranormal so I could try to live with it. But the fear didn't stay filed away. It grew. The footsteps started happening every night. They were always on the floor directly above me, shadowing my every move. I'd speed up. They'd speed up. I'd stop. They'd stop. I started to dread my patrols. My hands slick with sweat, my grip tight on my heavy maglite. I was a professional security guard, trained to handle threats I could see. But how do you deal with a ghost? I felt constantly watched, this deep, unnerving feeling that I wasn't just alone, but being observed by something I couldn't see. Then one night, about 2 months in, the game changed. I was patrolling the ground floor, listening for the usual ghostly echo from the second floor, but it never came. For the first time in weeks, the silence was total. It should have been a relief, but it wasn't. It was worse. The pattern was broken, and that was scarier than the pattern itself. I got to the West Wing, where the old psychiatric ward was. The air was always colder there. As I turned a corner, my flashlight beam catching dancing dust motes, I heard it. Not the heavy thump from above. This was a new sound. A soft, shuffling footstep, and it was on the same floor as me. Just around the corner, maybe 50 feet away. Every muscle in my body seized up. I clicked off my flashlight, pressing myself against the cold wall, just listening. Another shuffle, closer this time. Then, a faint metallic scrape. The sound of a tool against metal. It was coming from the old pharmacy room I had personally checked and locked less than an hour ago. My blood ran cold. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The footsteps. The ghost I had been afraid of for weeks. The thing that had been following me, shadowing my patrols, learning my routine. It wasn't a ghost. It was a diversion. Someone living had been using the acoustics of the empty hospital, walking on the floor above me to track my position, to know exactly where I was so they could move around freely somewhere else. The hunter I thought was a phantom was made of flesh and blood. I crept forward, my heart hammering my ribs. I peeked around the corner into the pharmacy, and I saw him. A thin, wiry man was crouched in the middle of the room with a crowbar, prying open an old narcotics locker. He had a backpack at his feet, already half full. He hadn't heard me. He was focused. For a second, I was paralyzed. This was so much worse than a ghost. A ghost couldn't hurt me. This guy, armed with a crowbar and cornered in the dark, definitely could. I raised my heavy flashlight, my knuckles white. "Get out!" I yelled, my voice cracking. The man shot to his feet, spinning around with a wild look in his eyes, holding the crowbar like a weapon. We stood there for a heartbeat, frozen in the dark, the only sound our own ragged breathing. He was just a man, probably a junkie looking for a score. But in that moment, he was all my fear made real. He had been my ghost. He was the thing haunting the halls of St. Jude's. He took a step toward me, then stopped. He glanced at the door, then back at me. He was doing the math. He decided it wasn't worth it. With a curse, he grabbed his backpack and scrambled out a window he'd broken to get in, vanishing into the night. The police came, took a report, but they never found him. I quit the next day. I couldn't shake the feeling. For 2 months, I had walked those dark halls, terrified of a spirit. But the whole time, the real danger was alive and well, walking just a few feet above my head, listening to my every step and waiting for his moment. I learned something on that job. The dead might be scary, but it's the living you really have to watch out for. The night shift holds a unique place in our minds. It's a time when the world is supposed to be asleep, making any strange event feel that much more unsettling. Thank you for watching and listening to these stories from the edge of the night. If you have a scary story from the night shift you'd like to share, leave it in the comments. For more Tales from the Dark, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Stay safe and always check the shadows. This Reddit story will break your brain eye. So here's the thing, I basically live on Reddit. Not the cute puppy side, more like the dimly lit alleys where people swap stories about stuff that shouldn't happen, but somehow does. Last week I tripped over a post on Arna Sleep that wasn't just another creepypasta. It claimed a whole new mental parasite lives inside certain words, and the moment you read them out, loud boom, your head's suddenly double booked. I called bullshit, then kept scrolling. Now I'm making this video because the only way I can prove it's fake is to read the whole cursed thing on camera. Title of the post? Ironically, it's "This Reddit story will break your brain." Let's test that. Quick heads up. According to the author, the second the last syllable leaves your lips, you'll never feel alone again. That's the hook, right? My plan is simple: yell the magic phrase into my mic, wait for absolutely nothing to happen, and we all go back to normal life. If something does happen, well, I guess that's content. Grab headphones, dim the lights, and try not to blink for the next 4 minutes. Ready? Let's roll. The post drops under the username Cognito host. First line, all caps, do not read. The following words out loud. Classic. He says linguistics grad students stumbled on the effect in a forum thread. One of them tossed up a string of phonetic garbage, think consonant soup, and asked for feedback. 20 minutes later, every single reply was the same. I can't tell which thoughts are mine anymore. University nuked the thread, but not before someone archived it. Supposedly, the link's still floating around invite-only discords. Then comes the sequence one, and only time it's printed. After that, Cognito host swears he's never had a private thought since. Not evil, just restless. It flips through his memories like a bratty kid with a photo album. End of section 1. If you feel pressure behind your eyes, close the tab. You still have time. Cute. I scrolled, expecting the usual Reddit dogpile of fake and gay. Instead, I found a wall of comments posted within 60 minutes, all identical. It's inside. It's inside. It's inside. No emojis, no snark, no nothing. Thread just stops mid-sentence like everyone's phone hit the floor at once. That's when my stomach did the first weird flip. The post is 2 years old, but shows 0 decay. No sleep auto-deletes dead posts after 6 months. This one looks freshly minted. 3 days later, Cognito host drops an update. He tried reversing the syllables. The thing laughed. He burned the paper he wrote them on. The flames spelled the words in smoke. Then he uploaded a 30-second audio clip of himself reading the sequence voice soft as bedtime story. No jump scare. I click play. Clip ends, page reloads, play button's gone. The post now reads, Update 2 no longer necessary. Subtle. Here's the embarrassing part. While skimming the first time, my brain inhaled the sequence without asking permission. Didn't feel a thing, just a tiny cold curiosity blooming right behind my eyes. Same spot you feel when you're being watched, but no one's there. I laughed, snapped my laptop shut, went to brew coffee. While the kettle hissed, I realized I was humming the syllables under my breath. I don't hum, ever. My reflection blinked a split second late. I raced back to the thread to call myself an idiot. New paragraph had appeared. The only way to be sure is to speak the words. It wasn't there before, I swear, on my playlists. Against better judgment, I scrolled down, found the sequence again, and read it out loud, slow and deliberate. Last syllable tool tasted like I'd licked a battery. 3 heartbeats of silence. Then the gap between beats stretched like taffy, and something exhaled using my lungs. Felt it poking around the edges of my memories, like a tongue checking for a loose tooth. Cognito host nailed the stages. Stage 1. The echo every thought you have. It thinks faster. Stage 2. The overlap you remember dinners you never ate. Friends you never made. Stage 3. The quiet. The quiet lasts exactly until you notice it's missing. I'm stuck between 2 and 3. My phone now autocorrects what or when into the sequence at random. Every podcast I queue up glitches at 11:47. Host stumbles over the syllables. Keeps talking like nothing happened. Last night I dreamed with subtitles scrolling across the bottom green text. Single phrase, glowing. Woke up tasting copper. Alarm clock blinking 11:47. Haven't felt alone since. I never meant to upload this. I was ready to drag the file to the trash and ghost the internet for a week. But the thing inside gets restless when it's confined to one head. It wants a stadium of minds. The only moment of peace I get is right after I hit upload, that split second of dispersal, like it's distracted by fresh real estate. So if you're still here, if you feel the tiniest tug behind your eyes, do me a favor. Pause the video, close the tab, go outside. Do not scroll to the pinned comment. I typed the full sequence there, don't ask why. You still have time. I wish I could twist the knife with a perfect jump scare or a clever punchline. Instead, I'll leave you with Cognito host's last line before his account went silent. I figured one more voice in the chorus wouldn't matter. Turns out the chorus was always just me. If tonight you hear an extra footstep, if tomorrow your autocorrect betrays you, well, you were warned. If you enjoyed this spiral into whatever this has become, sub or don't. I'll upload again soon, assuming there's enough of me left to find the record button. The church that opens at midnight. Have you ever driven through a town so small it feels like a place time forgot? The kind of town where the neon diner sign still flickers, where the gas station's only pump rattles like it's dying, and where the locals watch newcomers like they already know your secrets. That's where I ended up, Larkspur Hollow. And in Larkspur, there's a church that only opens at midnight. It's not on any map. You won't find it on Google. But if you're unlucky enough to be on Main Street at exactly 12 o'clock at midnight, you'll see its doors swing open by themselves. No priest, no congregation, just open. And the people who go in, they don't always come out. Before I get too far into this, if you're new here, make sure you subscribe. What you're about to hear isn't just a creepy campfire tale. This is what happened to me, and it nearly killed me. I was passing through town on my way to visit my brother. My car broke down, the radiator giving up a plume of white smoke. The mechanic said it'd take until morning to fix, so I checked into the only motel. The old woman at the desk handed me a key without a word, and as I turned to leave, she muttered under her breath, "Don't go near the church." I stopped. "What church?" Her eyes flicked up to the clock 11:53 p.m. and she just shook her head. 7 minutes later, I learned what she meant. I was sitting by the motel window when I saw the fog roll down Main Street. Not normal mist, this was thick, swirling, almost alive. And then I heard it, church bells. There was no church in town, not one I had seen. But as the fog parted, there it was. A tall, blackened steeple, its cross bent, windows glowing faintly red like embers. The church hadn't been there before, and its doors creaked open. Would you go inside if you saw a place like that? Let me know in the comments. I need to know I'm not crazy. Against every instinct, I stepped outside. The street was empty, no cars, no people, like the town had fallen asleep. But I wasn't alone. Figures moved through the fog, pale, stiff, wearing old-fashioned Sunday clothes, their faces covered in veils. None of them looked at me. They all walked toward the open church. And the sound they were humming, low, droning, like hundreds of voices trying to remember the same hymn. I don't know why I followed. Curiosity? Stupidity? Maybe something else was pulling me. But when I reached the doorway, I froze. Inside, the pews were filled with those veiled figures, all swaying, humming. At the pulpit stood a man, or what looked like a man. He wore a mask. Not the porcelain kind, not something decorative. It was a face stitched, pale leather, eyes painted black, mouth stretched into a smile too wide. And when he raised his hands, the humming stopped. He said only 3 words, "One more soul," and every single veiled head turned toward me. Would you run, or would you stay? Think about it, because what I did next was the worst mistake of my life. And if you're still here, subscribe. You'll want to know how this ends. I stumbled back, but the doors slammed shut behind me. The church was sealed. The masked man gestured, and the congregation began to chant words I couldn't recognize, syllables that burned in my ears. The floorboards beneath me rippled like water. My legs sank into the wood up to my ankles. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the chanting. The masked preacher walked toward me. With every step, his face changed. One blink and the mask was my mother's face. Another blink, my brother's. Then mine stitched, bloodied, smiling. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Suddenly, the lights in the church flared candles burning blue. Shadows writhed along the walls, forming shapes. Crucifixes breaking, bodies hanging upside down, eyes opening in the plaster. And then, just as he reached me, everything stopped. The chanting ceased. The candles snuffed out. The preacher leaned so close, I could smell the rot in his mask. He whispered, "Midnight is only the beginning." And then darkness. Waking up, I woke in my motel bed, drenched in sweat. The clock read 3:33 in the morning. I told myself it was a nightmare, just a dream, until I saw the dirt. My shoes were caked with it. My jeans had mud up the calves. And on my wrist, burned into the skin like a brand, was the shape of that crooked cross from the church steeple. I left Larkspur Hollow before dawn. The mechanic didn't ask why my hands were shaking, or why I refused to look back. But here's the thing 2 nights ago. Back home, I woke at midnight to the sound of bells. And outside my window, through the fog, I saw that steeple. So tell me, if the church finds you, will you go inside? These true Reddit horror stories will keep you awake for days. What's the most unsettling thing you've ever found in the woods? A weird animal track? An old, abandoned cabin? This story comes from one of those corners of the internet where the line between a true story and a nightmare gets terrifyingly blurry. It's what's known as a creepypasta piece of internet folklore that's so well told, it feels like it could have actually happened. And this one is set deep within the sprawling Nez Perce Clearwater National Forests in Idaho, a place known for its vast, untamed wilderness. The story goes that for one seasoned park ranger, the most unsettling thing he ever found wasn't a footprint or a ruin. It was a small, leather-bound book. He was used to the solitude and the normal dangers of the wild. But this book, this diary, it was anything but normal. It wasn't a story about getting lost. It was a story about being found. So if you're ready for a tale that will have you second-guessing every sound you hear in the dark, do me a favor and gently, very quietly, press that like button. You wouldn't want to draw any unwanted attention. Our story's about a park ranger named Thomas. A man in his late 40s. Thomas wasn't just working in the forest. He was part of it. He'd spent 2 decades on its trails, knew every peak, and could read the forest floor like a book. He preferred the whisper of the wind through the pines over the noise of any city. His ranger station was just a tiny speck of civilization in a massive wilderness, and that's how he liked it. He felt safer there than anywhere on Earth. That feeling wasn't going to last. It was late autumn, when the forest settles in for the winter. The tourists were gone, and Thomas was on a routine patrol, clearing a little-used trail. About 5 miles from his station, tucked away in a thicket of fir trees, he saw it, the tattered remains of a tent, shredded by weather and time. It looked like it had been abandoned in a rush. Gear was scattered everywhere. A rusted pot, a waterlogged sleeping bag, a busted compass. While cleaning up, his boot kicked something solid hiding under a pile of damp leaves. A diary. The leather was warped and stained, its pages swollen with rain. It felt heavy. Park policy was clear. Log any found items and store them. But as dusk started bleeding through the trees, casting long skeletal shadows, curiosity got the better of him. Back in the warm, isolated bubble of his ranger station, with a storm rattling the windows, Thomas poured a coffee, sat at his old wooden desk, and opened the book. The first page had a name in neat handwriting, property of Alex Miller. He started to read. At first, the entries were exactly what Thomas expected. Alex was a young, enthusiastic hiker, excited to be on a solo trip through the wilderness. September 4th. Made it to Clearwater. The air here feels ancient. It's the kind of quiet that's so absolute, you can hear your own blood pumping. Found a perfect spot to set up camp, way off the beaten path. I don't think I'll see another human soul for weeks. It's perfect. Thomas nodded. He knew that feeling. He kept reading, following Alex's journey. The first week was filled with wonder descriptions of sunsets and close calls with deer. But then, the tone started to change. September 12th. I think I'm lost. My compass is acting strange, spinning wildly. I should have stayed on the marked trails. I backtracked for hours today, but couldn't find the path. The trees all look the same. It's disorienting. Still, I have plenty of supplies. No need to panic. I'll get my bearings in the morning. September 15th. 3 days and nothing. Every direction looks identical. The silence out here is different now. It's not peaceful anymore. It's heavy. It feels like it's listening. Last night, I heard a noise, a branch snapping. I called out, thinking it was another hiker. No reply, just more silence. Thomas felt a familiar sadness. He'd seen this before. A lost hiker alone, their confidence slowly getting eaten away by the sheer, indifferent wilderness. The next entries were more sporadic, the handwriting more jagged. September 19th. Food is running low. It's been raining for 2 days straight, a cold, miserable drizzle. The world is just gray fog and dripping trees. The noises are worse at night. Not animal sounds. I know what a bear sounds like, what a cougar sounds like. This is different. It sounds like whispers, just at the edge of hearing. I keep thinking I hear my name. Alex, just a faint hiss in the wind. My mind is playing tricks on me. It has to be. Thomas put the diary down for a second, rubbing his eyes. The storm outside howled, and for the first time in a long time, the sound felt less like weather and more like a warning. He picked the diary back up. September 22nd. I'm not imagining it. It's real. It's mimicking things now. Earlier today, I heard a baby crying. A heartbreaking, desperate sound that made me want to run towards it to help. But there are no babies out here. It's a trap. I know it is. I stayed hidden in my tent, hands over my ears, until it stopped. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the crying. You have to wonder, what would you do here? Would you keep reading? Or would you toss the book in the fire and try to forget? These stories have a way of making you question the world you thought you knew. If you're into these kinds of dark and unsettling mysteries, please consider subscribing. It lets me know you want more stories from the edge of reality. Now, let's get back to Ranger Thomas, because for him, the story was far from over. Thomas was now reading with a gnawing sense of dread. The ranger station, which was supposed to be his sanctuary, suddenly felt small and vulnerable. The wind pushed against the cabin, and every creak of the old building made him jump. He turned to the last few pages. The writing was a chaotic scrawl, words jammed together, sentences unfinished. September 25th, I saw it. Oh God, I saw it. It's not an animal. It's tall and thin, impossibly so, like a shadow that's been stretched. It moves between the trees at the edge of my camp, never fully in the light. Its limbs are too long, and it moves in a jerky, unnatural way. But the worst part is its head. It has no face, just smooth, pale skin. But it knows I'm here. It watches me. Thomas felt his blood run cold. He'd heard local campfire stories about strange things in these woods, but they were always just stories. This felt terrifyingly real. He read the very last entry, dated September 26th. The ink was smudged, written with a trembling hand in a desperate hurry. It knows my name. It's been saying it all night. Not like the wind anymore. Clear as a bell. Alex, it uses my own voice. Sometimes it uses my mother's voice. It's trying to lure me out of the tent. It promises food. It promises rescue. I know it's a lie. It's a predator, and its bait is the sound of hope. I can hear it outside now, circling the tent. It's scraping the canvas. It's whispering, "Alex, let me in. This is it. Don't listen to the voices. Don't ever listen to the voices." And that was it. The rest of the pages were blank. A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by the crackling fire and the storm. Thomas stared at the final words, his heart hammering his ribs. He slowly closed the diary, his hands shaking. He was a man of logic. It was a tragic story of a hiker losing his mind to starvation and exposure. That was the logical explanation, the only explanation. And then he heard it, a whisper on the wind, so faint he almost missed it. It slid through a crack in the window, a soft sound that cut right through the storm. Thomas. He froze, every muscle in his body tight. It was the wind. It had to be. Just like Alex thought. He was letting the story get to him, letting his imagination take over. He stood and walked to the window, peering out into the swirling dark. He saw nothing but the thrashing trees, their branches like frantic, grasping arms. Thomas, clearer this time, closer. It sounded like it was on the porch, right outside his door. And it was his own voice. A perfect, chilling copy of his own voice, whispering his name from the night. He stumbled back from the window, his breath catching in his throat. His sanctuary was gone. The thick cabin walls felt like paper. The diary lay on the desk, not as a record of a tragedy, but as a prophecy. A warning he got far, far too late. He was no longer reading Alex Miller's story. He was living the next chapter. The story, a classic from the deep woods of the internet, ends there. It never says what happened to Ranger Thomas. It leaves him in that cabin, the fire dying down, with the whispers starting up in the darkness. According to the tale, he never filed a report about the diary. Who would believe him? They'd say the isolation was getting to him, but he knew what he heard. He is now the man in the story, trapped not by a wall, but by a sound. A voice that is both his and not his, calling to him from the trees. Every night, when the wind picks up, he has to wonder if it's just the wind, or if it's the faceless thing that now knows his name, patiently waiting for him to make one simple mistake, to listen, to answer, to open the door. What do you think happened to him? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more stories that will make you sleep with the lights on, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. Thanks for watching. This true Reddit horror story is so strange, I can't sleep. We all think of our home as a sanctuary. It's the one place on Earth we're supposed to be safe, where the locks on the doors keep the world out. But what if the danger isn't outside? What if it's already in? There are stories out there, on Reddit, and in hushed news reports, about people finding strangers secretly living in their homes. It's a phenomenon called frogging, and while the following story is a composite inspired by those real-life accounts, it paints a picture so chilling, you might just start checking your own Crawlspace. A home invasion is one of our deepest fears, right? The sudden crash of a window, the violent intrusion. But what if the invasion wasn't sudden at all? What if it was silent, slow, and happening right under your feet for months? What if the monster wasn't trying to break in, but was already inside, learning your schedule, listening to your conversations, and watching you while you slept? This is the horrifying possibility one family faced, and it's a story so strange, it's bound to keep you up tonight. It all started with a perfect suburban house on a quiet tree-lined street. We'll call the family the Millers. For Mark, Sarah, and their two kids, 14-year-old Liam and 11-year-old Chloe, this house was the dream they'd saved years for. It was an older home, built back in the 70s, with the kind of charm you just don't find anymore. It had its quirks, like a laundry chute and a slight slant to the upstairs floor. It also had a big crawl space under the living room, with a dirt floor and a simple wooden hatch in the pantry closet. When they first moved in, Mark took a quick look with a flashlight. It was just a dark, musty, cobweb-filled space. He thought about securing the flimsy latch on the hatch, but you know how it is with small move-in tasks. It got forgotten. Life just got in the way. Mark worked in IT, Sarah was a teacher, and the kids were swamped with school and sports. Their life fell into that comfortable, everyday rhythm. Mornings were a blur of toast and backpacks, and evenings were for dinner, homework, and relaxing in front of the TV. The house really became their safe space. It was where they had birthday parties, rode out storms, and just felt at home. They got used to its personality, the creak of the floors, the clank of the pipes when the hot water was on. These were just the sounds of home. They had no idea someone else was learning those sounds too. And from the darkness right below their feet, that person was also learning the sounds of them. The first weird things were small. So small, you'd just brush them off. It started in the kitchen. Sarah came home one day, and a new box of granola bars was completely empty. She asked the kids, who swore they didn't touch them. She blamed Mark, thinking he took them for work lunches. He said he didn't. It was just a tiny, forgettable argument. But then, a week later, half a pizza they'd saved in the fridge was gone. This time, the kids really went at it, accusing each other until they finally just dropped it. Then the noises started. At first, you could barely hear them. A soft thud from downstairs in the middle of the night. Mark would go check, find nothing, and blame it on the house settling. Sarah would sometimes hear what she thought was faint whispering, but she'd decide it was just the hum of the fridge. It's just easier to find a logical reason than to think about what else it could be, isn't it? They were a modern, rational family. They didn't believe in ghosts, and their doors were always locked in a safe neighborhood. An intruder just seemed impossible. So they joked about their house ghost that was stealing food. But you could tell a little seed of unease was there. Sarah started checking the locks twice before bed. Mark would pause the TV, straining to listen to the silence, which suddenly didn't feel so silent anymore. That feeling that something was just off was getting harder to ignore. Soon, the little oddities weren't so little anymore. Their ability to explain things away started to crack. One night, the whole family was watching a movie when their golden retriever, Buster, shot up and started growling at the floor. Not at a person, not at the door, but right at the hardwood floor. He trotted over to the pantry, sniffed like crazy at the bottom of the door, and let out this low, deep bark. Mark had to drag him away, but Buster wouldn't stop staring at the pantry, with the fur on his back standing straight up. The noises got louder, too. They weren't just thumps anymore. They were shuffling sounds, clear as day, coming from under the floor. One night, Sarah was jolted awake by what sounded like a muffled cough, seemingly right under their bed. She shook Mark awake. He'd heard it too. He got up, pressed his ear to the floor, and heard nothing. But they were both totally freaked out. The feeling of being watched was constant now. Sarah would be cooking and get that prickly feeling on her neck, like someone was right behind her. She'd whip around to an empty room. Chloe started complaining that her bedroom door, which she always shut, was open a crack every morning. They noticed other things too. The thermostat would be a few degrees off in the morning, or a book on the coffee table would be sitting on the end table instead. This wasn't random anymore. It felt intentional. The family's stress levels were through the roof, and they started fighting, snapping at each other. Their home, their sanctuary, now felt hostile and creepy. Every creak and shadow sent a jolt of anxiety through them, and a horrifying thought started to creep in. What if the threat wasn't outside trying to get in? What if it was already inside? It all came to a head on a cold Tuesday night. They just finished a tense, quiet dinner when a loud crash came from the pantry. This wasn't a thump. This was the sound of something heavy falling and shattering. Buster went absolutely nuts, barking and clawing at the pantry door. That was it. No more doubt. Just pure adrenaline and terror. Mark yelled at Sarah to call 911 while he grabbed the heaviest flashlight he could find. As Sarah shakily told the operator what was happening, Mark crept to the pantry. He ripped the door open, his heart hammering against his ribs. The floor was covered in broken glass and pickles from a shattered jar. But that's not what made his blood run cold. The small wooden hatch to the crawl space, the one he'd forgotten all about, was pushed open just an inch. He dropped to his knees, his hand shaking so bad the flashlight beam danced across the walls. He pulled the hatch open and pointed the light into the darkness. And then he saw it. The light landed on a makeshift bed in the corner, a filthy pile of old blankets and some of their own clothes. All around it were empty food wrappers, pizza boxes, and granola bar packages. And huddled against the far wall was a man. He was skinny, dirty, and his eyes were wide with terror in the beam of the flashlight. He just stared back, like a trapped animal. For a second that felt like an hour, everything was silent. It was the collision of their safe little world and this man's secret one. He had been living there for months, listening, watching, right underneath them. Mark scrambled backward, slamming the hatch shut and throwing his body against it. The police arrived just moments later. 2 officers went into the pantry, drew their guns, and ordered the man to come out. After a few tense moments, a thin, disheveled man in his late 40s slowly climbed out, blinking in the bright kitchen light. He didn't fight or resist at all. As the police questioned him, the full story came out. He was homeless and had been looking for shelter from the cold when he found their unlocked crawlspace hatch. He'd been there for weeks, maybe even months. He would wait until they were gone or asleep to sneak upstairs for food and water. He admitted he'd watched them sleep through a heating vent that connected the crawl space to their bedroom. In his little nest, police found a small kitchen knife tucked away in a shoebox, a terrifying sign of how much worse things could have gone. This kind of story is a horrifying reminder that the phenomenon known as frogging is very real. If this story got under your skin, do us a favor and hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into true scary stories that make you question everything. The man was arrested, but it wasn't over for the Millers. How could it be? They couldn't be in their house anymore. Every single sound was a reminder of the man who had lived right under their feet. That feeling of safety they once took for granted was just gone. They sold the house within 6 months, unable to shake the psychological scars. Stories like this one are a chilling testament to the fact that sometimes the worst monsters are very real, and the places we feel safest can be hiding the darkest secrets. This Redditor stalker wasn't human. For 3 weeks, my life was a living nightmare. I had a stalker. Every single night, the same blood-curdling scream would just rip through the silence, a sound that started to etch itself into my sanity. I did everything you're supposed to do. I boarded up my windows. I called the cops. I even started sleeping with a baseball bat next to my bed. I was doing everything right for someone who was being hunted by a person. But I was wrong about who or what was watching me. And the truth, it's far more terrifying and way stranger than I ever could have imagined. If you've ever heard something you can't explain or felt a presence that you know shouldn't be there, you should probably subscribe, because the story I'm about to tell you might just sound a little too familiar. It all started when I moved into my first house. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple 2-bedroom bungalow, but it was mine. The best part, though, was the location. It was at the end of this long, quiet cul-de-sac and my backyard was basically a dense state forest. For the first month, it was paradise. The quiet was such a relief after the non-stop noise of my old apartment. I'd just sit on my back porch in the evenings, watching deer wander through the trees, and feel this sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The woods were my backyard, and they were ancient, just thick with old-growth oaks and pines that created this canopy so dense it pretty much blacked out the sky in some spots. It was beautiful, but it was also heavy. You got the feeling you were a guest in a place that had its own history, its own rules, long before you showed up. My neighbors, a retired couple a few houses down, told me the forest was almost completely untouched. People get turned around in there easy, the husband warned me with a friendly smile. Stick to the marked trails. I had no plans to do anything else. I was happy with my little slice of civilization right there on the edge of the wild. But as I was about to find out, sometimes the wild doesn't stay on its side of the line. The first time I heard it, I almost slept right through it. It was just after 3 a.m, that dead hour of the night when the whole world feels like it's holding its breath. I was jolted awake by a sound my brain couldn't really process at first. It was a scream, but not like a horror movie shriek. It was this raw, agonizing wail of pure despair. It sounded human, but distorted, like it was stretched thin by the distance and the trees. I sat bolt upright in bed, my heart hammering. I just listened, straining to hear anything else, but there was nothing. Only the crickets. I told myself it was a fox. I'd heard they can make some seriously human-like sounds. Or maybe it was just teenagers messing with the new guy on the block. I got up, my feet cold on the floor, and crept to the back window that looked out into the forest. Nothing. Just the deep, solid blackness of the woods under a moonless sky. No flashlights, no shadowy figures, no sound of someone running away. The silence that followed the scream was just as unnerving as the scream itself. It was like the night just swallowed it whole. I stood there for a long time, staring into the dark with this cold knot in my stomach. I eventually talked myself down, told myself I'd imagined it or that it was an animal, and got back into bed for a restless night. I was wrong. It was just the beginning. The second night, it happened again. Same time, just after 3 a.m. Same gut-wrenching scream echoing from the woods. This time, I knew I wasn't dreaming. This time, the whole "it's a fox" theory felt pretty thin. The sound was too consistent, too deliberate. It was filled with this specific kind of agony, like a performance of pain that felt chillingly personal. By the 4th night, I was positive I had a stalker. Some deeply disturbed person was getting their kicks out of terrorizing me. The peace I'd felt in my new home was gone, replaced by this nightly countdown to terror. I'd just lie awake, staring at the ceiling, completely tense, just waiting for it. My work started to suffer. I was jumpy, irritable, living on caffeine and paranoia. I bought new locks for all the doors and windows. I got blackout curtains to try and block out the sight of those oppressive woods. After a solid week of this, I finally called the police. An officer came out, listened to my story, and walked the property line. He found nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, no sign of anyone being there at all. He was polite about it, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. He gave me the same explanation I'd first given myself. "Sir, you're right up against the forest. It's most likely a fisher cat or a fox. They can sound just like a person screaming." I felt like an idiot. I felt dismissed, but I knew what I was hearing. An animal doesn't scream with the same rhythm, at the exact same time, every single night for a week. This was human. This was a threat. The police said they'd increase patrols, but the screams kept coming night after night. I was on my own. The feeling of being watched was constant, and the sense of isolation was crushing. My home, my sanctuary, had become my prison. After 2 weeks of this, I'd had enough. I decided I needed proof. I had to have something to show the police, to show anyone, to prove I wasn't losing my mind. I downloaded a high-quality audio recorder app on my phone and got ready to finally capture it. That night, I just sat there in my dark living room, phone in hand, and waited. 3:14 in the morning. It came, but this time was different. It was closer, so much closer that it wasn't an echo anymore. It was a raw, physical sound right outside my house. It was the same wail of despair, but underneath it, I heard something new. A kind of unnatural, guttural rattle, like the sound of grinding dry leaves. A sound that just wasn't human. My hand was shaking as I hit record. Then, pushed by this morbid curiosity I couldn't fight, I crawled to the window and peered through a crack in the curtains. And I saw it. For just a second, right at the edge of the woods where the moonlight managed to cut through the trees, a figure was standing there. It was tall, way too tall. Its limbs were long and thin, and they were bent at angles that were just wrong. It wasn't wearing any clothes, but its body was this shifting, hard-to-define column of pure shadow. As I watched, it just swayed once, like a reed in the wind, and then melted back into the total darkness of the forest. I stumbled back from the window, shaking, my mind just reeling. That was not a person. My phone felt like it weighed 100 pounds. I played the recording back, pressing the speaker to my ear. The scream was there, just as I'd heard it. But listening to the recording, I heard something else that I had missed in the moment. A faint, electronic-sounding noise buried inside the scream itself. It was the sound of my smoke detector's low battery chirp, the one that had been driving me nuts for a week. And underneath that, almost too quiet to hear, was the sound of a woman crying softly. I hadn't been crying. And then the most chilling part hit me. The weeping, it sounded exactly like a clip from an old movie I'd fallen asleep watching on the couch 2 nights before. It wasn't just screaming. It was learning. It was mimicking me. The fear didn't go away. It just changed. It went from the primal terror of being stalked by a person to this deep existential dread of the unknown. This wasn't some guy with a weapon. This was something else entirely. Something ancient and unnatural. The screams weren't a threat aimed at me. They were a broadcast. My focus changed from security to research. I started tearing through local history archives online, digging for any folklore about the state forest. I found bits and pieces, old forum posts from the early 2000s talking about the woods. They all mentioned strange noises, feelings of overwhelming sadness, and a local legend, a kind of boogeyman the old-timers used to scare their kids with. They called it the grief eater or the sorrow echo. The stories were all a little different, but the core idea was the same. A reclusive entity drawn to places of deep sadness, an emotional parasite that would absorb and then endlessly replay the sounds of pain tied to a location. It fed on misery. This new, terrifying idea sent a jolt through me. The house. It wasn't about me at all. It was about the house. I'd bought it from a bank as a foreclosure and knew almost nothing about the people who lived here before me. A few more hours of digging through public records gave me a name. An elderly couple, the Martins. More searching led me to an obituary. Mrs. Martin had passed away in the house about a year ago, after a long and painful battle with cancer. Her husband, unable to live with the memories, moved away and eventually lost the house to the bank. It all clicked into place with this sickening clarity. The screaming wasn't for me. It was an echo. The last, desperate sounds of a woman in her final moments, absorbed and now replayed by a thing that had been drawn to this spot by her suffering. My stalker wasn't human. It was a living, breathing recording of a tragedy. That night, for the first time in weeks, I wasn't scared. I just felt this profound, aching sadness. I thought about Mr. Martin, having to listen to his wife's pain day in and day out. I thought about her, alone in her final hours. And I felt this strange, unexpected pity for the creature in the woods, a mindless, hollow thing, cursed to only repeat the sorrow it consumed. When 3 rolled around, I didn't hide. I didn't tense up. I just waited. The scream began, that awful, familiar sound of agony from the trees. But this time, I didn't hear it as an attack. I heard it as a memory stuck on a loop. I walked to my back door, unlocked it, and stepped out onto the porch. The cool night air felt good. The scream faltered for a second, almost as if it was surprised. I looked toward the dark tree line where I'd seen the figure before. My voice was quiet, but it felt steady in the huge silence between the wails. "I hear you," I said. "I know. It's over now. She's not in pain anymore." I didn't shout or threaten it. I just spoke with a simple, quiet empathy. You don't have to hold on to it. You can let it go. You can be at peace. The screaming stopped. It didn't just cut off. It faded. Like the sound of a bell slowly losing its ring. It just dissolved into the night until only the chirping of the crickets was left. And at the edge of the woods, I saw that impossible shape one last time. It didn't run. It just seemed to shrink, to fold into the shadows, and then it was gone. That was a year ago. The screams have never come back. The heavy, oppressive feeling that clung to the house is gone, replaced by the simple, peaceful silence I first fell in love with. The woods are just woods again. I don't feel like I was hunted anymore. I feel like I was a witness to the final act of a long tragedy. The creature wasn't a monster, not in the way we usually think of them. It was a vessel for pain, an echo of a life that ended inside these walls. The truth wasn't just stranger and more chilling than a human stalker. It was infinitely more tragic. And it left me with a question I still can't quite answer. When a place is haunted, is it by a ghost, or is it by the memory itself? What would you have done? Would you have run? Or would you have faced the echo? Let me know in the comments. For more stories that dig into the strange and the unsettling, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. You never know what's waiting out there in the dark. This true Reddit ultra creepy horror story will terrify you. For weeks, the faint scratching from the attic was just background noise, part of the house's nightly chorus. I kept telling myself it was rats a story. I was desperate to believe. It's a sound you can live with, you know? Just a pest problem in an old house. But the night I finally worked up the nerve to investigate, I found the truth. Someone had been living up there. And through a small, jagged hole in my bedroom ceiling, they'd been watching me sleep. I'd been in the house for about 6 months. It was a 2-story colonial on the edge of town. The kind of place that feels like it has history etched right into its bones. I honestly loved its quirks, the way the floorboards sighed under my feet, the stubborn kitchen window that needed a good shove, the giant oak tree that threw dancing shadows across the lawn. It was my sanctuary. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor, a cozy little space right under the attic, which was only accessible by a pull-down hatch in the hall. I'd poked my head up there once when I first looked at the place. It was just a dusty, forgotten space, full of insulation and smelling like old wood and time. The noises started about 2 months in. At first, it was so faint I could barely hear the light skittering sound that only ever happened at night, always from directly above my bed. Rats, had to be. What else could it be? The house backed onto the woods. It was the only logical answer my brain would accept. I felt pretty self-sufficient, buying a few old-school snap traps, baiting them with peanut butter, and sliding them into the attic. Every weekend, I'd drag out the ladder, pop the hatch, and check. Nothing. The traps were always empty, the bait untouched. I tried different bait, new traps, even those stupid ultrasonic things you plug into the wall. But the scratching continued, this soft, persistent scraping in the middle of the night. I was starting to get more annoyed than scared. It was just a stubborn pest. an inconvenience. I told myself the rats were just too smart, pushing down that little seed of unease that was starting to sprout in the back of my mind. The sounds were always short, and they'd stop the second I made any noise, as if whatever was up there was listening to me, just like I was listening to it. The change was so gradual, I almost didn't notice it. The scratching started to sound less frantic, less like an animal. Sometimes, instead of skittering, there'd be a slow, dragging noise. A long scrape, like something much heavier than a rat was being pulled across the floor. Then one night, I was jolted awake by a soft thud. It was a single, distinct sound, not like the house settling. It was the sound of something being set down. I lay there, totally frozen, just straining to hear anything in the silence that followed. After 10 minutes of nothing, I convinced myself I must have dreamed it. But then other little things started happening. Small things that made me feel like I was losing my mind. I'd come home from work and find my bedroom door was slightly open, even though I know I closed it. I'd just blame it on a draft or my own forgetfulness. I started to get that cliché feeling of being watched. It would just hit me at random times, reading in bed, working at my desk. A prickle on the back of my neck that made me look up and scan the empty room, my heart doing a little flutter. Of course, I never saw anything, just my familiar safe walls. The smell started about a month before it all ended. A faint, foul odor, stale and kind of sour. It was strongest in the upstairs hall, right by the attic hatch. I'd sniff the air, wrinkle my nose, and figure a mouse had finally died in a wall somewhere. I bought air fresheners, but they only covered it up for a little while before it would creep back. A subtle, constant reminder that something in my house was rotting. One evening, as I was trying to fall asleep, I heard a new sound. It was a soft, wet cough. It was so quiet, so muffled by the ceiling, that I tried to tell myself it was the wind or a branch on the roof. But it sounded human. That's when real fear, cold and sharp, finally cut through all my excuses. I snapped on my lamp, my heart pounding in my chest, and the entire house fell silent. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. I was just lying in bed, scrolling on my phone in the quiet house. The scratching started, but it was different this time. More deliberate, more energetic. Then came the thud, louder than ever, right over my head. It sounded like someone dropped a bowling ball. I flinched, my eyes shooting up to the ceiling as a little shower of dust and drywall rained down on my blanket, catching the light from my phone. That was it. That was the moment my denial just shattered. Rats don't drop things. Squirrels don't cough. All the logical excuses I'd been clinging to for weeks suddenly felt so stupid, like lies I'd been telling myself. This wasn't an animal. Pure, undiluted fear just washed over me. My first instinct was to run, just get in my car and drive and never look back. But something else took over almost instantly. This cold, defiant anger. This was my house, my sanctuary, and something was in it, violating the one place on earth I was supposed to be safe. I lay there for what felt like hours, my phone in my hand, my thumb hovering over 911. But what would I even say? I think there's a rat in my attic, but it might be a person. They'd think I was a lunatic. I knew I had to see for myself. I had to know. The fear was a cold knot in my stomach, but it was mixed with a terrifying resolve. I had to know the truth. I moved like a robot, like I was watching someone else in a movie. I slid out of bed, grabbed the heavy mag light from my nightstand, and walked into the hall. The pull cord for the attic hung there, looking completely innocent. Retrieving the stepladder from the garage, every step I took felt like a thunderclap in the silent house. With a hand that wouldn't stop shaking, I pulled the cord. The hatch groaned open with a puff of dust and a wave of that stale, sour smell, so much stronger now that it made me gag. I froze, listening. Nothing, just silence. Taking a shaky breath, I climbed the last few rungs and pushed my head and shoulders into the suffocating darkness. I flicked on my flashlight. Its beam cut a sharp cone through the black, sweeping across dusty wood beams and pink insulation. I saw old Christmas decorations, a forgotten suitcase, my useless, empty rat traps. For one incredible second, relief washed over me. It's empty. I'm just crazy. I imagined it all. I was about to climb down when the light snagged on something. In the far corner, behind some storage bins. It was a pile of old blankets and a dirty sleeping bag arranged into a makeshift bed. My blood went ice cold. I swung the light back and forth, my hand shaking so badly it being danced. Next to this nest were empty water bottles, crumpled chip bags, and a stained bucket. The source of the smell. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought they'd break. I was just stuck there, half in the attic, unable to process what I was seeing. Someone had been living here. Not for a night. This was a camp, a home. As my trembling light continued to scan the scene, it hit something else. A small collection of items laid out neatly on a piece of cardboard. And right on top, resting on a dirty rag, was a silver locket from my grandmother. I hadn't seen it in a year. I thought I'd lost it when I moved. The final soul-crushing discovery came when I forced myself to move the light. I saw a spot in the insulation, right in the middle of the attic floor. I pointed the beam down. There, carved crudely into the floorboards, into the ceiling of my bedroom, was a small, jagged hole, no bigger than a quarter. It was positioned directly over my bed. And just like that, the whole horrifying reality crashed down on me. They hadn't just been living above me. They had been watching me every night. For weeks, maybe months, lying in the dark, just feet away, peering down through that tiny, malevolent eye. I don't remember climbing down the ladder. Suddenly, I was just standing in my hallway with my back against the wall, staring up at the closed attic hatch, like the devil himself was about to burst through it. I called the police. They came, they saw everything, and they confirmed it all. They found footprints in the dust, and fingerprints on the bottles. But whoever it was, they were gone. They must have slipped away into the night while I was building up the courage to go up there. They were never found. I sold the house. I couldn't spend another night there. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched from above, of my most private moments being stolen. That kind of terror can never really leaves you. You jump at every creak, you eye every shadow, and you never, ever dismiss the strange noises you hear in the night, because sometimes it's not rats. Sometimes it's something so much worse. The most terrifying part is the question that still haunts me. They knew my schedule. They knew my life. And they were never caught, which means I have no idea if they're still out there, watching someone else. If you've ever had an experience like this, something you couldn't explain that left you terrified, share it in the comments. I read all of them. And if you want to hear more true horror stories that will make you question everything, make sure to subscribe. You never know what's lurking just out of sight. These true Reddit horror stories will make you delete the app. You know, the monsters that are really scary aren't the ones in movies. They're the real ones. The ones that might just exist in the quiet corners of our own world. The stories you're about to hear come straight from Reddit, posted by users who claim to have survived encounters that will make you think twice about that noise you just heard downstairs. These accounts, whether they're 100% factual or not, tap into our deepest fears. We're going to hear from someone who found out a stranger was secretly living inside their walls, and from another who had to make an impossible choice when a stranger showed up at their door in the middle of the night. These are the kinds of stories that stick with you, because a small part of you knows they could happen. Our first story comes from a Reddit user who had just moved into a new house with his mom. For a few months, things were pretty normal, except for the noises. An odd bump here, some scratching there. His mom figured it was just rats in the walls, and honestly, he didn't give it much thought. In a weird way, the sounds became almost comforting, a little bit of life in the dead silence of the night. That all changed one evening. He was jolted awake by a sound he knew instantly. It was the faint, rolling sound of his closet door sliding open. He strained his eyes in the pitch-black room, but he couldn't see a thing. He tried to tell himself he was just imagining it, his mind playing tricks on him in the dark. He shut his eyes, trying to force himself back to sleep, but the feeling of being watched was just overwhelming. He knew he wasn't alone. After a few moments that felt like an eternity, he slowly cracked his eyes open again. He scanned the room, his heart hammering against his ribs, and then he saw it. In the tiny crack of his closet door, an eye was staring right back at him. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was the entire half of a man's face, his eye wide, unblinking, just watching. He was frozen. A cold, paralyzing terror took over his entire body. He wanted to scream or run, but he couldn't move a muscle. He could only stare back as the figure stayed perfectly still, its gaze locked on him. Finally, a muffled sob escaped his lips. He tried to ask what the person wanted, but the words got caught in his throat. That's when the closet door slid open a little more, revealing the man's full figure. The user remembers the man's voice was cheerful, almost like he was singing, as he whispered, "It's okay." But it's what the man said next that sent a wave of pure horror through him. He said the user's name. This stranger, hiding in his closet, knew his name. In that single moment, any hope that this was just a nightmare was completely shattered. This was real. The user finally found his strength, scrambled out of bed, and bolted from the room, not stopping until he found his mother. They called the police, who came and searched the house. In his closet, they found the access panel to the Crawlspace. From the looks of it, the man had been living there for weeks, maybe even months. He had learned the user's name just by listening to them through the floorboards. According to the Reddit post, the man was never found, leaving the user with the terrifying knowledge that a stranger had been living inside the walls of his home the whole time. What do you do when you're faced with a decision where every single option feels wrong? This next story comes from a user who was just a kid when this happened, about 10 years old, back in 1987. Her dad and brother were gone for the weekend, leaving her 8-year-old sister, and their mom home alone. They'd spent the night playing Monopoly and watching TV before they all crashed in sleeping bags on the living room floor. Around 2 a.m, a frantic, desperate pounding on the front door woke them up. They crept to the window next to the door and saw a young woman, probably in her late teens or early 20s. She was hysterical, crying and begging them to let her in, claiming her boyfriend was chasing her and was going to kill her. Think about that for a second. A terrified woman is on your doorstep, pleading for her life. Your first instinct is to help, right? But the user's mother stayed incredibly calm. She spoke to the girl through the locked door, her voice firm but gentle. "I'm sorry, love," she said. "I can't let you in because I have 2 little girls in here, and I can't risk your boyfriend getting in and hurting them. But I can call the police for you if you just stay right there." The woman outside got even more desperate, insisting there was no time, that they had to let her in now. Again, the mother politely refused. She ran to the kitchen, grabbed the wall-mounted phone with its super long cord, and dialed 911. While she was on the phone with the dispatcher, she went back to the door and told the woman the police were on their way. This seemed to push the woman over the edge. She screamed, "I don't need the police because I'll be dead before they get here." But the mother stood her ground, apologizing again, but refusing to unlock the door. And that's when the woman's entire demeanor changed. She just stopped. She turned around and walked calmly off into the darkness. 5 or 7 minutes later, the police showed up, but she was long gone. For years, the user said she felt guilty about it, wondering what happened to that girl and thinking her mom had been cruel. It wasn't until she was much older that her parents told her what the police said that night. The officers explained that this was a known tactic used by home invaders in the area. One person, often a woman, creates a desperate story to get you to open the door. As soon as you do, their accomplices, hiding nearby, rush the house. That young woman wasn't a victim. She was the bait. Her mother's difficult choice had likely saved them from something truly horrible. It's pretty chilling how quickly a safe situation can turn, isn't it? If you appreciate these kinds of stories and want to hear more, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you don't miss what's next. It really does help us out a ton. Now, let's get back to the darkness. Our final story is about a different kind of home invasion, one that was quieter, slower, and in some ways, a lot creepier. It was posted by a Reddit user who lived with his family in a house right up against a large wooded area. He and his dad were both hunters, so they knew the woods and the people around them pretty well. One afternoon, the user's father was just sitting on their back porch when he saw a man walk out of the tree line and onto their property. He didn't recognize him. The stranger walked up to the porch and started a conversation. He seemed friendly enough, but his questions were off. He asked if they had any deer on their property. The father said no. Their land wasn't really suited for it. The man pushed, asking if he could hunt on their land anyway. The father politely said no, explaining it wasn't a good spot and they didn't allow others to hunt there. The man seemed to accept it and walked away, disappearing back into the woods. It was a weird conversation, but nothing to really worry about. A few weeks went by and the user was home alone. He was in the living room and heard a knock at the front door. He looked through the peephole and saw the same man standing there. The user didn't open the door. He just waited. The man knocked again, harder this time. After a few silent moments, the man turned and walked off. The user watched through a window as he walked to the edge of the yard, turned back to look at the house one last time, and then vanished back into the forest. This started happening every few weeks. The man would just show up. Sometimes he'd knock. Other times, he'd just stand at the edge of the property, staring at the house. The family got more and more unnerved. They knew he wasn't a neighbor. He wasn't dressed like a hunter, and his story about wanting to hunt deer on their land just didn't add up. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, a constant, low-level dread hanging over their home. Things came to a head one evening when the user and his father were out hunting on another property, miles from their house. As they were walking back to their truck, they heard something on the trail ahead. A man stepped out from the trees. It was him, and he was casually holding a pistol in his hand. He walked up to the father and asked again, "Seen anything?" The father, trying to stay calm, said no. All the while, the user was standing a short distance away, partly hidden, with his own rifle ready. He watched the man, who seemed confident, almost cocky. The father then mentioned his son was with him and gestured over to where the user was standing. The user gave a little nod. The second the stranger realized the father wasn't alone, his entire attitude changed. All that confidence just evaporated. He seemed to realize he'd made a huge mistake. Without saying another word, he turned and walked away quickly, disappearing down the trail. They never saw him on their property again. But they were left with the bone-chilling realization that this man probably wasn't interested in hunting animals. He had been hunting them, scouting their home, learning their patterns, and waiting for the right moment. A stranger in the walls, a potential trap at the front door, a patient predator in the woods. These aren't just spooky campfire tales. They are accounts of moments that changed how the people who live them see the world. They remind us that the feeling of safety we have in our own homes can be surprisingly fragile. And that true horror isn't always about ghosts, but about the chilling unpredictability of other people. What these Reddit users survived is a powerful argument for trusting your gut, for listening to that little voice in the back of your head that tells you when something feels wrong. Because as these stories show, you never really know who might be watching from the darkness, or what's waiting on the other side of your door. Thanks for watching. Try not to think about it too much. The circle inside the horror box. Welcome back to Halfway Dark. Tonight's descent is not just a story. It has an opening into something that should never be opened. Before we step inside, remember, subscribing keeps you close to the shadows, but just far enough away to survive them. Now, let's begin. They called it simply the box. It wasn't a treasure chest, not a crate, not anything that could be explained by wood and nails. The thing was a riddle of angles, a shape that looked different every time you stared at it. When travelers stumbled upon it, they swore its sides rippled as though painted on liquid. Nobody admitted they wanted to open it. Nobody admitted they already had. The circle came first as whispers voices you couldn't locate, but that seemed to speak directly inside your skull. Faces emerged, pale as paper and stretched too long, like wax softened in the sun. They smiled without moving their lips, and in that stillness was a command: join. Inside the horror box was no treasure. It was a room without walls, a space that grew as you breathed, a dark expanse where the only things visible were the bone dolls. Each doll was child-sized, delicate, arranged in a circle. They clutched hands, their empty sockets locked on anyone foolish enough to step across the threshold. And once you did, you were no longer outside looking in you, or part of their circle. One traveler, a boy of 19, found the box buried in wet leaves along an old roadside. His laughter echoed when he pulled it open, convinced he'd stumbled on a prank or some forgotten stage prop. By nightfall, the laughter had turned into screams. Witnesses said his voice carried through the woods, breaking off into gasps, until it didn't sound like a boy at all anymore. What escaped the box afterward wasn't human. It looked like him at first glance, yes, but his movements were wrong, mechanical. Every gesture timed like a marionette, tugged by invisible strings. The circle had claimed him, rewoven his body into its endless play. And here's the most unsettling part. The box is said to travel. It appears in motels, in back alleys, in basements you swear were empty yesterday. Wherever loneliness collects like dust, it waits. Some swear it can even reach across screens, that when you see it, even in a story, a piece of it has already noticed you. If you hear whispering tonight, if you dream of dolls with clasped hands, don't break the circle. Don't look too long into the dark. And if you see a box that seems to change shape the longer you stare, leave it closed. This has been the circle inside the horror box. This Reddit story is so chilling, it should be illegal. The blizzard had been screaming for hours when the banging started on my front door. This wasn't a polite knock. It wasn't a neighbor borrowing sugar kind of tap. This was a frantic, panicked, drumming fists on oak sound that the shrieking wind almost swallowed whole. But it was just sharp enough, just human enough, to cut right through the storm and chill me to the bone. I live alone out here. It's a small house, miles from anything you could call a town, a little bubble of quiet I usually love. But on nights like this, when snow is piling up so high, it's probably covering my windows. Quiet becomes isolation. The whole world shrinks down to just these four walls, and the wind sounds like a predator trying to claw its way in. Now, it seemed like something else was trying to get in too. My first thought was just raw, uncut fear. Who in their right mind would be out in this? They'd called the roads impassable hours ago. No one should be out there. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a wild rhythm against the pounding on the door. I crept out of the living room, my socks silent on the cold floorboards. The banging didn't stop. Bam, 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 bam. A pause, just long enough for me to think it was over, and then it would start again, even more desperate than before. I made it to the door, my hands shaking as I went for the peephole. My own breath fogged the lens before I could see anything, and when I wiped it clear, I saw a woman, framed in that weird fisheye view. She was just a mess of hair and snow. Her face was pale, gaunt, and for a second she looked over her shoulder back into the white nothingness, her eyes wide with a terror so deep I felt like I could feel it through the door. She turned back and pressed her mouth close to the wood. Her voice was muffled, broken. "Please, you have to let me in. They're chasing me." They? The word just echoed in my head. Out here? In this storm? Who the hell was they? My mind just spun out, picturing escaped convicts or hunters who'd gotten lost and gone crazy. The blizzard was a monster, sure, but a predictable one. The idea of a human threat, of real malice out in all that natural chaos, was so much worse. She started banging again, a sob catching in her voice. "Please, I saw your light. They're right behind me. I swear, they're going to kill me." A war was raging in my head. Every horror movie I'd ever seen, every warning my parents ever gave me was screaming, "Do not open that door. Call the police," which was useless. The phone lines were dead. But whatever you do, don't open the door. This is how the story always starts, right? The well-meaning person whose kindness gets them killed. But then I looked through the peephole one more time. I saw her face raw and red from the cold. I saw actual tears freezing on her eyelashes. I pictured her just collapsing out there, her voice swallowed by the wind, her body buried in the snow until the spring thaw. Could I live with that? Could I just sit here in my warm house and listen to someone die on my doorstep? The banging stopped. It was replaced by this low, hopeless weeping. And that sound, that was the sound of hope dying. In that moment, my conscience just took over. I couldn't do it. I just couldn't let her die. My fingers were clumsy, shaking with adrenaline as I fumbled with the locks. The deadbolt made a heavy clunk. The chain rattled free. I took one last deep breath and pulled the door open. It was like opening an airlock in a hurricane. A wall of wind and stinging snow just exploded into the hall, knocking the breath out of me. The woman basically fell inside, collapsing in a heap on the welcome mat. She was just a tangle of wet hair and shivering limbs. She was real, and she was freezing. I had to throw my entire body weight against the door to get it shut against the wind. The world of white noise was gone, sealed away, and the quiet that fell was deafening. I slammed the locks back into place, the deadbolt, the chain. Every click echoed. I wasn't just locking the storm out, I was locking us in. "Thank you," she whispered from the floor, her voice thin and shaky. "Oh God, thank you." She was shivering so violently, her whole body was shaking. Her coat was pathetically thin for this kind of weather, and completely soaked. My fear just vanished, replaced by pity and the urgent need to get her warm. "It's okay," I said, my own voice a little unsteady. "You're safe. Let's get you out of those wet things." I helped her up. She was so light she felt frail. Her hands were like blocks of ice as I helped her peel off the soaking coat. Underneath, she just had on a simple, thin dress, also damp and clinging to her. I grabbed a thick wool blanket off the couch and wrapped it around her. She hugged it to herself like a shield, her teeth chattering so hard I was worried they'd crack. "I'll make some tea," I said, mostly just to say something, to try and make this feel normal. I led her to the living room, sat her on the sofa, and went to the kitchen. My hands were still trembling as I filled the kettle. My mind was a mess. Who was she? Who was chasing her? I kept glancing at the front door, expecting the pounding to start again, but this time heavier, more threatening. But there was nothing, just the howl of the wind. I came back with a steaming mug of tea. She was still curled up on the couch, but the worst of the shivering had stopped. She took the mug in her shaky hands and gave me a weak smile. "You saved my life," she said, her eyes on the steam. "Anyone would have done the same," I said, sinking into the armchair across from her. "What happened? Who was chasing you?" She took a long sip of tea, her eyes looking far away, like she was replaying it all in her head. I gave her a minute. The silence in the room stretched out, broken only by the storm outside. Then she lowered the mug, and she looked right at me. The change was so fast, it was sickening. The fear in her eyes? It was gone. Not faded, just switched off. The grateful, shivering woman was gone, and something else was sitting there. Her posture straightened. The frail woman who was curled up a second ago suddenly had this unnerving confidence. A strange quiet fell over the room. It was heavier than just a lack of sound. The storm outside seemed to get quieter, like the house itself was holding its breath. And in that awful silence, one single, terrible thought hit me. The frantic knocking she was running from. It never came. There was her pounding, and then nothing. No footsteps on the porch. No angry shouts. I had been locked in here with her for 10 minutes, waiting for the other shoe to drop, and it never did. "I don't hear them," I whispered, the words feeling stupid as they came out of my mouth. "The men, they're gone?" She didn't answer. Instead, a slow smile spread across her face. It was the most horrifying thing I have ever seen. It wasn't a smile of relief. It was too wide. It was a predator's smile. A smile that said, "I won." And then I saw her teeth. My brain just short-circuited, trying to understand what I was looking at. There were too many of them. They weren't in a normal, human arch. They were crowded, layered, a chaotic mess of white. Some looked like human molars, but right next to them were teeth that were long and thin and sharp as needles, like something from the bottom of the ocean. Canines that were too long, incisors that were jagged. It was a biological nightmare, crammed into one impossible mouth. "Oh," she said, and her voice had changed too. It wasn't thin and reedy anymore. It was smooth, musical, and had this ancient, chilling amusement to it. "They aren't out there anymore." She stood up from the couch, not like a person stiff from the cold, but with this fluid, snake-like grace. The blanket dropped to the floor. She just stood there in her simple dress, and somehow seemed to suck all the air out of the room. "They were never out there," she continued, taking a slow, deliberate step toward me. Her smile never faltered. "That was just a story. A good one, don't you think? The kind that gets a door opened on a cold night." My heart didn't just hammer. It felt like it seized. The locks, the deadbolt, the chain. They weren't keeping me safe. They were caging me in. I hadn't saved her from the monsters outside. I had just let the real one in. I was trapped. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I tried to move, but my body was frozen, paralyzed by a fear, so complete my whole nervous system just shut down. I was a statue, a front-row spectator to my own end. She took another silent step. The lamplight caught her eyes, and I could have sworn they glowed, just for a second. She tilted her head, and that impossible smile stretched even wider, making the corners of her mouth pucker and strain. "You have such a kind heart," she purred, the sound vibrating in the still air. "It's always the kind ones who are the most trusting. They always open the door." She was right in front of me now, looming over my chair. All I could see was that terrible, impossible smile. It was the last thing I would ever see. And outside, the blizzard howled, a perfect, desolate scream that sounded an awful lot like mine, a scream that no one would ever hear. That story, man, it gets under my skin every time. The idea that your home, your one safe place, can become a trap just because you decided to be a good person for 1 second. It's a terrifying thought. So what would you have done? Would you have opened the door? Have you ever had one of those moments, maybe with a stranger, where something just felt deeply wrong? Let me know in the comments. I really do read all of them. And if you like stories that leave you feeling a little uneasy, do me a favor and hit that like button, and make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss what I'm dragging out of the darkness next. Thanks for listening. The Marionette Collector's Box. It arrived in the dead of night, carried by someone I never saw. No footsteps, no knock. Just a small black box sitting on my doorstep, polished so dark it almost swallowed the dim porch light. Before you keep listening, hit subscribe. Once you witness the box, it remembers you. And if it remembers, it waits. I opened it carefully. Inside were marionettes, each no taller than a foot, carved from wood so smooth it felt almost alive. Their joints were delicate, each movement precise. Their eyes, tiny glass spheres, reflected me in a way that was impossible. They weren't mirrors. They were windows. I should have left them there. I should have called someone. But curiosity is louder than caution. I lifted one out. Its head tilted unnaturally, and though its mouth was fixed, I could hear it whispering my name. By the second night, the whispers had multiplied. Every shadow, every corner of my apartment seemed to move. I would glance at the marionettes, and they would be somewhere else, sitting where I had not placed them, watching, waiting. I tried to throw the box into the trash. Hours later, it was back, open, the marionettes seated in neat rows, their glass eyes glinting in the darkness, each whispering a different word, forming sentences I didn't understand but felt compelled to obey. The rules became clear quickly. Never remove a marionette from the box after midnight. Never answer their voices. Never stare too long. I broke every rule. I picked up one, just to see its face. It moved in my hands as though alive. The wood shifted, flesh growing subtly beneath the paint, veins and hair threading through. My reflection in the mirror didn't match my movements anymore. I saw myself as one of them, stiff, jointed, smiling in ways that were not mine. By morning, I realized they weren't confined to the box. The marionettes had multiplied. Tiny shadows crawling along the walls, their glass eyes tracking my every move. They whispered, not in language, but in patterns, teaching me rhythms my body could not resist. I tried to escape, packed my bags, ran into the streets. But every alley, every turn led me back to the apartment. The box waited at the front door, open, inviting. Now, I record this because it may be the last proof I am still myself. The marionettes wait in every reflection, in every darkened corner. They whisper instructions I cannot refuse. Every time I blink, I feel myself becoming more like them and less like me. If you ever see a black box with tiny puppets inside, do not open it. Do not touch it. And if you hear a whisper that sounds like your own voice calling you to it, run and subscribe. Leave proof of yourself somewhere outside its reach. That is all that may save you. The ice cream mime. I remember the first time I heard the music. It wasn't jingly or sweet like an ice cream truck should be. It was slow, deliberate, dragging, like metal scraping across glass. I was walking home late, fog settling over the empty streets, when I saw it parked under the streetlight. An old ice cream truck, its paint peeling, windows fogged. And behind the glass, a mime. Its face was painted white, black lines stretching into a grin far too wide. Its hands pressed flat against the window, smearing the glass with something dark I couldn't identify. Lean closer. I need you to understand how wrong it was. Not just strange. Wrong in a way that crawls into your chest. Before we go further, hit subscribe. Not for me. For survival. Because if you ever see a mime like this, you'll want to leave a record that you saw it. A trace. Memory fades in places like this. The streets were empty. Usually, even at midnight, a car passes, a distant voice. Tonight, silence. The truck's music played, low and metallic, vibrating in the air. I froze. Its wide, painted eyes seemed to pierce me, though mimes don't have eyes. They mimic, they follow. But this one, it watched. I turned my head for a second, and when I looked back, the truck had moved closer. Slowly, without engine noise, creeping toward me. My stomach turned. Something about the fog made its form flicker. 1 second it looked normal. The next its limbs were too long. Hands bending the wrong way. Smile stretching impossibly wide. I tried to walk past, quickening my pace. But I could hear footsteps behind me, matching mine, though no one was there. I looked over my shoulder. Nothing. Only the truck, windows glowing red, the mime pressed against the glass, closer than physics should allow. By the time I reached the corner, I realized it had started following the rhythm of my heartbeat. The music wasn't coming from the truck. It was coming from inside me. My chest thumped, my ears rang, and each step made the melody louder. Panic surged. At home, I locked every door and window. I tried to convince myself it was a prank, someone in a costume. But the next morning, I found faint tire tracks leading straight up to my front porch. And smeared on the doormat white paint, black streaks, was a smiling face, a miniature version of that wide grin. Night came again. I told myself it couldn't return. But around 2 a.m, a soft metallic tune wafted through the cracked window. I peeked out. The truck was gone from the street, but the melody was louder inside my apartment, vibrating the walls, pressing against my skull. I called the police. They said no ice cream trucks had been reported in the area. No trucks, no mimes. Only the faint static of an old melody lingering in the night. I started seeing it in reflections. My kitchen window, the black screen of the TV, mirrors. A flash of the truck's red glow, a grin. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of the mime's hands pressing from the inside of the glass, fingers smearing shadows across the pane. I tried recording it. My phone captured nothing but silence. No music, no truck, no moving shadow. Only when I played it back on full volume did the faint metallic tune creep out of the speakers, just faint enough to drive me insane. The box arrived 2 nights later. A small black crate, edges scratched and worn, with a note scrawled in red. Serve the next customer. Inside, a mask. White, with a painted mime smile, impossibly wide. I didn't touch it. But the music grew louder, closer. By the 4th night, I could hear the wheels on my hardwood floors. The truck had appeared inside my apartment. Impossibly, its fogged windows glowing red. The mime's face pressed against the glass. Hands stretched across the interior, smearing shadows along the walls. My heartbeat synced to its tune. I tried running, tried hiding, tried throwing the mask out the window. None of it mattered. The truck's music followed me, bleeding into my ears, my dreams. It whispered my name, mocked my heartbeat, told me I had to serve the next customer, or it would come for me. I realized then, this wasn't just a mime. The truck wasn't just a vehicle. It was an entity, a predator of rhythm and fear, moving through streets, shadows, and minds. And I had been marked. Tonight, as I sit here typing, I hear the soft metallic tune winding up outside my door. The red glow flickers across my walls. I know it won't stop until I step outside, put on the mask, and drive it. I can feel the grin pressing against my chest, the painted hands bending my will. My reflection smirks back. If you hear music like this tonight, don't chase it. Don't peek out your window. Don't breathe too loudly. And subscribe to this channel. Leave proof that someone saw it before it claimed you. Because once it chooses its next customer, it won't just follow. It will become. And you won't escape the melody. The whispering crosswalk. The night was empty, the city breathing soft and low, neon signs flickering like a dying heartbeat. I walked alone, the soles of my shoes wet from drizzle, tapping lightly against the asphalt. Up ahead, the crosswalk glimmered white, a lifeline across black streets. That's when I first heard it, my name, whispered from nowhere, curling around the quiet like smoke. I froze, chest tight, my breath visible in the cool air. There was no one there, just the crosswalk, buzzing slightly under the dim lights. I told myself it was the wind, that my mind was playing tricks, but the whisper came again, sharper, almost impatient. "You shouldn't be here," it hissed. A part of me wanted to run. Another part, the deeper part, leaned forward, curious, stupidly curious. I stepped toward the crosswalk. The lights blinked once, twice, and the white stripes stretched longer than they should have. Each step I took felt heavier, slower, as if the street was pulling me in. The buildings around me seemed ordinary, yet wrong. Windows reflected things that weren't there. Shadows moved in impossible angles, sometimes mimicking me, sometimes running ahead. I reached for the crosswalk button, but it wasn't a button. It was smooth like glass, cold and slick under my fingers. And the whispers now more than one swirled from every corner. I tried to step back. The street behind me folded in, stretching into the distance, leaving me facing only the crosswalk. A soft metallic taste filled my mouth. My phone buzzed with a message I hadn't sent, words I didn't write. "Come closer." I looked up at the streetlights. Each lamp flickered, pulsing in sync with my heartbeat. I wanted to look away, to run, to blink it all out, but I couldn't. One lamp glowed brighter than the rest. In it, I saw a face my face, but wrong, elongated, eyes too wide, mouth stretched in a grin I didn't own. It tilted its head, watching, waiting. Every instinct screamed to move. Every step forward dragged me deeper. The crosswalk pulsed under my feet, stripes stretching, bending, pulling. My name whispered again. 100 voices layered, each syllable slicing the air. I wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't leave my throat. My hands shook, but I moved forward anyway. The street around me began to distort. Buildings leaned inward. A fog rolled in, thick and heavy, pressing against my skin, filling my ears with muted laughter. I stumbled, and the asphalt seemed to ripple like liquid, swallowing every sound but the whispers. They repeated, closer, 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 and then I saw them, figures at the edge of the street, silhouettes with no faces, mouths opening and closing in impossible ways. They moved in sync with the lights, bending like shadows on water. They didn't walk. They glided, but the air between us seemed solid, pressing me toward the crosswalk. I wanted to stop. I wanted to fight. But every step forward was automatic, inevitable. One shadow lifted a hand and pointed. Another mirrored my movements perfectly, step for step. I realized they weren't behind me or ahead. They were me. The crosswalk ended. Or it should have. The other side stretched endlessly, neon lines pulsing like veins, the street folding into itself. I ran, but my legs felt heavy. Every movement repeated, doubled, and the whispers grew into a chorus. They knew me. They knew everything I had ever feared. A figure emerged directly in the pulsing light. Its face was blank, smooth as porcelain, but my reflection shimmered beneath it. I stumbled backward. It moved forward. I moved back. The city itself seemed to breathe, a giant lung, and I was trapped inside it. I remembered the first step, the first whisper. I remembered thinking it was just a shortcut. It wasn't. It was a door, a trap, a thing that collected people who strayed too far from the ordinary. My phone vibrated again. Words scrawled across the screen, typed by no one. "You are already part of this." My own hand trembled as I read them. A shadow mirrored my expression, my panic, but its eyes glimmered with something alien. I wanted to run, to escape the city, to blink and find myself somewhere else. But the lights pulsed, the street stretched, and the whispers pulled tighter. I realized the crosswalk wasn't trapping me. I was the trap. The alleyways, the streets, the lamps, they all bent around my fear. A single car passed. It had no driver. Headlights bright, reflecting my own face back at me. And then it disappeared, swallowed by the night, leaving only the whispering chorus behind. If you're watching this, and the streets around you feel too quiet tonight, don't step onto a crosswalk alone. Don't answer the whispers. And subscribe to Halfway Dark, because memory fades, but subscribing leaves a mark, a trace, a witness. The lights flickered one last time, and then all was still, except for the whisper. See you next time.